Look, thanks for coming back on to the podcast. The main reason I was thinking of having you on today was because I wanted to do a podcast discussing the interaction between strength and hypertrophy, strength training, and hypertrophy training. And obviously, I follow you on Instagram, and I've noticed like over the last year you've made really good gains. And I think that a lot of people uh, in the bodybuilding camp of things think that the idea of like upping the weight progressively on your like lifts is something that powerlifters or weightlifters should be doing. And then by the same token, in like the area where I'd be doing my training, like in powerlifting, there can be a sentiment that I would have bought into before, that doing any kind of like higher volume hypertrophy type work is a waste of time because it's all about just adding load to the bar and trying to get stronger. But I think those two worlds actually interact and help each other out a lot more than people would realize. So tell me a bit about like how your training's been going the last year, because I've noticed you both putting on size and also getting a lot stronger. I'd say you're now repping close to my 1 rep maxes on most of my lifts as a power lifter. So obviously your training is going pretty well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. It's always fun to get invited on to the podcast to talk about yourself of all subjects as well.
Nice ego
Um,
boost.
yeah, yeah. No, training's been going fantastic. I can say, for considering that we're in a lockdown. When everyone was kind of panic buying order things in the first lockdown, I panic ordered a load of weights and went on to obscure websites to find out if I could get a 5 kilo plate and everything, ordering from the UK. And that's
Yeah.
what I did. Bought a load of stuff. And so, like, 2-3 months into lockdown, I had myself pretty much everything I would need to continue on training as per regular. Now, I'd love some leg extension machine or a hamstring curl or anything like that, but beggars can't be choosers. So I have a barbell, weights, and everything, and very fortunate to be in the position to be able to train still.
Yeah.
Um, and with that came the decision to basically be like, I just need to focus on my compounds, and I have 230 kilos worth of plates. I'd love to be by the time we get out to lockdown, whatever that be, is to be on one lift, to be repping that, or to be able to at least lift all of the weight that I have.
Yeah.
And that was kind of just a little internal goal. And so I just started working towards it. Now obviously I still have my bodybuilding goals and everything like that. But I guess prioritization of goals um has to be assessed when something like global pandemic comes along and you're thrust into lockdown and there's not shows going on or anything like that. You have to say to yourself, right, maybe I'm going to a step back. I'm going to get a little bit fluffier around the edges. Maybe I'll let the love handles go a little bit and just focus on putting on a bit of size, putting on a bit of strength, which is not something that everyone's comfortable with.
Yeah.
But again, to me, it's the means justify the end goal for sure.
Yeah.
So it's been going good since I've had that kind of switch.
um yeah, I think it's actually in some ways like I'm doing like a training out of a garden at the moment, and again the only equipment is a barbell, um 2 kettlebells and some bands. I think that's pretty much it, and then obviously like a bench and a rack. But it can almost be sort of liberating in a way that like the choices that you have are stripped down so much that like you have no option but to just go in and try to progress on a few exercises. Whereas sometimes if you're in like a gym where you've got a dozen different machines and dumbbells and all sorts of different stuff, like you can almost end up shooting yourself in the foot by not creating a singular goal to focus on and trying to get good at too many things at once. So without getting too much off topic, I definitely agree with that. But so uh, I suppose that first thing I'd like to chat to you about is, you'd know more about this because your goal is bodybuilding. and I'd be more powerlifting. But do you notice that in the bodybuilding world, there's maybe less of a focus on that idea of progressing your exercises in terms of both the volume and also eventually the load that you're using over a long period of time? Because I feel like I've noticed that there's maybe more attention given to things that are maybe a little bit harder to measure, like whether you're getting a pump or whether you're activating certain muscles. And there's maybe not as much emphasis always put on the structure of the session. Although I have noticed that changing over time with, more evidence-based stuff coming into the bodybuilding world. But what would your take be on that? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like there's still definitely participants in bodybuilding, a large percentage who would follow kind of less, for the lack of a better term, bro science, the old school methods of just go in, basically tear yourself apart with multiple sets of, just infinite amount of reps, chasing that kind of pump, that feeling, because that's what they've related to muscle growth.
Yeah.
It's almost in the sense being like, oh, I'm growing in this acute instance in the gym. I must maintain some of that size once I leave the gym. And there's no realization of, well, it's actually just an increase in blood flow and blah, 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 all that fun stuff. But it's like, no. That's actually the muscle just goes. But there is definitely a shift. I guess maybe it's because of the circles that I would hang in that the bodybuilders that I would know or kind of talk to are either bodybuilding coaches alongside their own bodybuilding pursuits, or they have a college education, or have just been at it for so many years that they know, oh, hey, this is how you go about it, and their training would definitely reflect it. There's a very, like, amongst those who compete and have competed multiple times, not saying that this is a large generalization, it would just be the ones that stand out to me. They know their shit, they know their body, and they know their training, and like that, there would be the same execution of training similar to like a power lifter or an Olympic lifter. There would be that amount of detail put into each session of what needs to be done, the amount of sets, amount of reps, particular exercise selection. But definitely when you're looking from the outside in, it doesn't look like that at all, because it looks messy, because sometimes bodybuilding training is, for anything like a better phrase, is just messy. It's going from one exercise to another, pairing up exercises all over together, doing giant sets when they're needed. Like, if anyone's listening to this and wants like a great scientific source for bodybuilding training, he's called the Hypertrophy coach, the Hypertrophy coach. You probably follow him yourself.
It's the guy with the massive beard,
the epic beard.
Yeah,
epic beard.
Yeah.
He's fantastic, but like he even talks like about just the increases over time.
Yeah.
But then there's always something like a superset, a giant set, going to failure, and all those things. And they're what are typically associated with bodybuilding and everything like that. But people tend to look at it and be like, oh, I need to do that for every exercise. I need to do that for every set. When it's done at higher levels, it's done sparingly, and it's done for a reason, not just because we're feeling good for this exercise.
Yeah. There's a very good guy that I've started following. Well, I kind of known about him for a couple of years, but I've only really started kind of watching some of his videos and stuff like that. It's a guy called Jordan Peters.
Oh yeah, JP.
Yeah, trained by JP. And I love his kind of philosophy about like really all the information and feedback that you need can be found in your training logbook, and that there's not enough emphasis put into that by like beginners and intermediates who need to kind of realize, like, I think he was saying that, like, like feeling the muscle working is great and like learning how to get the mind muscle connection. But he was saying, like, if you're executing like a hack squat properly, and you go from being able to do that from like 80 kilos to 120 kilos on the machine, there's just no way that that's not going to grow your quads, as long as you're doing sufficient volume and everything. And like, that's pretty much all of his focus is on what his numbers are on the lifts that he's determined are going to help him grow the different muscles that he's trying to train, and trying to get those to go up over time. And he also made an interesting point about, like, again, relating to the stuff that I want to get into in this podcast, about like how strength and hypertrophy are in many ways the same thing, in that just because a bodybuilder isn't doing a 1 rep max, they're still trying to get stronger overall over time, just maybe on, higher reps, like sets of 6 to 12 or so. Because I've noticed that there's been some discussions in like the academic circles saying like, oh, strength and hypertrophy aren't related, but realistically they're talking about like 1 rep max strength. Like, how much is doing a 1 rep max going to improve your ability to build muscle? But if you go from being able to do a weight for 5 reps to like being able to do that with 15 or 20 kilos more, in all likelihood you're probably going to be a little bit bigger as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, oh, for sure. It's the big shift for me over the last few years is the less focus of when we talk about the three M's of hypertrophy, we talk about muscle damage, metabolic stress, mechanical tension.
Yeah.
And the big focus for me was I would have been very much of, oh, metabolic stress, muscle damage, they're the ones you need to focus on. Like, you need to damage the muscle, all that, years ago. And now that's changed to mechanical tension is all really that I pay attention to, because if you're doing things right, grand, you'll gain a little bit of muscle damage along the way, those micro tears that you want to see or whatever.
Yeah.
Again, here nor there about it, metabolic stress, here nor there about it. But I find that if you're focusing on mechanical tension, which is just essentially lifting more weight for longer periods of times or for more reps, more sets, and you're just progressing that way, which in turn is just strength training. You can gain muscle from doing 2 or 3 reps if they're done at a higher intensity, repeatedly over long periods of time, that being like, multiple training sessions. That, to say that it wouldn't build muscle would be, I think would just be incorrect, because it, like you said, it doesn't really make sense that if you're, what JP said, if you're pushing that weight for more reps and it's the same weight, or if you're upping the weight but keeping at the same reps for 2 or 3 reps, the fact that to say that you wouldn't gain muscle,
Yeah.
even just a little bit, it's difficult to kind of justify.
Yeah. And I suppose I always try to, whenever there's like an area like that where you're not entirely sure what the answer is going to be, I always like to try to revert it back to the base principles of like, what is training? What effect does that have on our body? Why is our body even reacting and building strength and muscle in the first place? And realistically, it's an adaptive response to keep us alive and make sure that this guy isn't going to get crushed the next time that he puts weight on the bar. And one of the adaptive responses that helps your body do that is putting muscle on. So that's what I would usually drop back to. One thing I'd like to clarify, because I'd say there'd be some people listening who don't have any idea what metabolic stress is or mechanical tension or anything like that. So just to clarify what Conor is talking about there. So from the scientific research that's been done on hypertrophy, which is just muscle building, you kind of have 3 main proposed mechanisms by which that might happen. So your metabolic stress is the idea that when you're doing things that are, more kind of in the high rep sort of range, like maybe say sets of 15 to 20, that some of the waste products that are generated by that are going to lead to muscle growth. So that's your metabolic stress, or like you were talking about, like giant sets or rest pause and stuff like that. Mechanical tension would be more like the actual load itself that's being put on the muscle. So you can increase the length of time that tension is happening by doing more sets and reps, or actually just increasing the weight itself. And then muscle damage is kind of like a byproduct of all or of both of those, right? Although you could do that by doing a longer eccentric, but muscle damage is something that, from my reading of the research, is kind of something that is incidental to doing either of those things.
Yeah, exactly. It's thrown in there because it's present whether you do one or the other. If you're increasing mechanical tension, you're going to experience micro tears in the muscle. If you're going towards metabolic stress, which is what you're saying there, which is the higher rep range, it's what would have usually been considered bodybuilding, going for that pump or going for that burn, essentially. That results in just micro tears as well. And it's important to clarify then as well, when we say micro tears, this is stuff that like your body just heals up over the course of a couple of days. It's not something that you need to be resting long periods of times because
Yeah.
you've torn your muscles. It's basically just imagine a house, and you kind of just fill it in the cracks every single time, but you leave just a little bit of extra plaster every time, and then same thing kind of happens over and over again until you have a bigger house.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happens, but that's terrible. All of a sudden, you're just building on a conservatory of just straight plaster. But yeah, no, the mechanical tension is one that I find it easier to, whether coaching team sport athletes or just my clients, I find it easier to say to them, right, look, if you're increasing the weight, if you're increasing the reps, your strength will go up, but a byproduct of that will be that you'll gain a little bit of muscle. And likewise, if the goal is to gain a bit of muscle, I would say, right, we can gain muscle, but it'll be a little bit easier if we just get stronger along the way as well. Instead of, I'm just shifting that mindset from it needs to be 15 or 20 reps, or it needs to be three sets of 10. Like, I love training, and it's mainly why I would do like things like 3 sets of 5 or three threes or stuff like that, because I love training. I love training intense.
Yeah.
But I also have to relate it to my goals. And so you can imagine me a few years back when I realized, geez, I can build muscle with 3 reps. Yeah, let's go.
Let's do it. Actually, there was some interesting research that came out there last year that kind of, gave a lot of weight to something that I think quite a few bodybuilders have been doing for a while, which is where they had people do a strength phase before going into a hypertrophy block. And they found that the group that did that actually had a little bit more muscle growth. So would that be something that you use when you're structuring your training?
Yeah, for sure. I love a cheeky like periodization plan. I can't help myself but do an Excel sheet or a Google Doc sheet.
Yeah.
I just love all the putting the colors in and everything. So I always give myself a strength phase. Um, Even though you could say like there's no reason to periodize bodybuilding, I think there definitely is. Just because your body is no different to other people's.
Yeah.
So you're going to need time to recover. You're going to need time to adapt to certain things. So I always include just a 4 to 6 week strength phase, and then I'll do something like 3 months of hypertrophy. Obviously, 3 months in some people's head might be, geez, that's a long time, but that's my sport phase per se.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you're a team sport athlete, you might spend 6 or 8 weeks in hypertrophy. You might spend more time in power and strength as well. Obviously, I'm not doing power or anything like that, so it's just strength, hypertrophy, kind of back and forth, and your deloads as well.
Yeah.
But I do like have every few months I have a strength phase of I go in, I focus on compounds, I focus on movements that I want to improve, and that helps the hypertrophy phase go a lot smoother. I can gain muscle, recover at a higher weights and higher reps um, a lot easier. And
Yeah.
it's constantly giving myself a new challenge, basically, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't see a reason not to do it.
And so would you personally believe that that strength phase is helping you grow more muscle just by virtue of the fact that it's variety and that you're working with heavier weights and in a different rep range? Or do you think it's more that you've now increased the amount of weight that you can use for the higher rep sets?
I'd say it's a little bit of both, but
Yeah.
I would teeter on the side of that I'm able to use heavier weights for higher reps. So
Yeah.
an example would be you're going. It's not that you're going to gain more muscle if you're at 140 or 160. It just means that you have been training with 140 for say 3 sets of 10 on squats. And if you keep on doing that, you're progressing up to 12 reps and all that. But if you do a strength phase and all of a sudden you can use 160 for 3 sets of 10, your body, which is well adapted already, is going to go, gee, this is a different load. This is a whole different ball game now. We have to up our way to it. And like you said, it's basically the body just adapting, being like, I don't want to die the next time I do this.
Which you can feel like under a heavy set of 10 on squats.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think there's many things that I hate quite as much as that 10 to 20 range on squats. Okay, so I think that's kind of the strength influence on hypertrophy side of things pretty well covered. In case there's anything else you wanted to add in there. But now I wanted to kind of discuss what I've experienced and your take on it, which would be the effect of hypertrophy on someone who's more focused on strength training, whether that's a powerlifter or a weightlifter. Or I'm fairly confident that there's zero strongman competitors listening to this podcast, but we'll throw them in there for the sake of the argument. So one thing I've noticed is that, and this lines up pretty well with the research that's been done on beginners, is that really like a beginner who's doing strength training can make really rapid progress in their weights with very little muscle gain going on at all. And that makes sense both from research and the theoretical underpinning that people are learning how to perform an exercise for the first time. They're developing efficient technique, efficient neurological patterns for firing their motor units and blah, 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 all the sciencey stuff. But that only works for a while. And then people hit a big old wall and plateau. And it's been my experience that once that happens, that's when gaining a bit of muscle and working with some higher volumes can really help. And I did a bit of research into this recently. I was looking at some stuff on the Stronger by Science website, and there's actually a term for this called normalized muscle force. I think it was called. And that's basically the amount of force that your muscle can put out relative to its size. And so it makes sense that the closer you get to, the 100% potential of that, the harder it's going to be to get stronger without just making the muscle bigger. And then you can kind of drop your percentage down again and start building up. So around 2018, I had hit a massive plateau on my lifts, and I'd say my squat hadn't moved in like 2 years. I think I was stuck at like 160. My bench had plateaued pretty hard, and I was barely making gains on my deadlift. And my body weight hadn't changed in about 2 years either. And just as an experiment, I started to gain a bit of body weight. I think I only gained about 5 kilos of body weight. And over the course of the next year, I put 30 kilos on my squat. So my squat went from 160 to 190. My bench went from about 110 to 120, I think. And my deadlift went from 190 or maybe 200 to 217. So that's like 60 odd kilos, I think, of addition to my total just by gaining body weight.
So what was that? That was squat was 210, bench
Squat was 190, so it went from 160 to
190.
190. That's 30 kilos. Pretty sure the deadlift was just under 200. We'll say it was 200 for the sake of keeping it easy. That went from 200 to 217, so that's 47 and a half kilos. And then about 10 kilos on my bench. So just shy of 60 kilos added to my total over the course of a year. And that's a pretty good trade-off for 5 kilos of body weight added. Yeah. If I had to add 10 kilos of body weight to do that now, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah. For sure. That's great.
Yeah. And so that really, hammered home to me, like just how important gaining muscle can be for people who have strength training goals. And I see this obsession within the lifting culture with this idea of getting as strong as possible without putting on body weight. And people love to use examples of like, you know, some 70-kilo Chinese weightlifter who can squat treble body weight. And I think what people forget is that the reason we're talking about people like that is because it's so fucking rare and they're such outliers, and it's amazing. You know, we wouldn't be putting up YouTube videos and Instagram videos of them if it wasn't amazing to see. But I think people have to accept that they're not that genetic outlier, and they're probably going to have to put on a bit of muscle to be able to get anywhere close to that treble bodyweight squat.
Yeah. Oh God. If I, if only I had a a euro for every time I compared myself to some outlier, or whether it be Olympic weightlifter or some 70-kilo power lifter who's just demolishing my numbers for warm-ups and multiple reps and sets.
Yeah.
It's like you're saying, they're outliers, and they don't think it's, you know, this is some 70 kg kid who's just rocking up on his first day and pulling these numbers. It's probably years of in a system and development. And if we're talking the Chinese or the Russians or the Americans, we're probably talking a little bit of external help as well.
Yeah. Not
You
according
know,
to Matt
so
Fraser, though.
not according to Matt Fraser. Yeah. The Americans are clean. Scrap them from that list. Just up there with winning the most medals, but they're clean.
Yeah.
The important thing to realize is that if you're just a day-to-day individual, you know, you have a desk job, you have a labor job or something like that, it's unrealistic to expect that when you start to plateau in strength that you can just power through it, because I would say the training necessary to stay at the same body weight and continue at a reasonable rate of increasing strength, you know, whether you want to dedicate, you know, if you want to stay at the same body weight and dedicate the next 10 years of your life to putting on 2.5 kilos to your deadlift, sure, go ahead, rock away. There's nothing I can say to improve that.
Yeah.
But if you're just like, geez, I wouldn't mind lifting more on my deadlift, well, then fucking just slap on 5 kilos. I'll never forget when I was in college, my lecturer, who was teaching resistance training, turned around to us and he said he had a bet with his friend, and the bet was that in 2 months he couldn't get up and bench 100 kilos. And this guy, no real training background or anything, so he said he was kind of like, his current max was about the 60-50 range. And he said, you know what he did? He just became 100 kilos himself. He just blew up. He just put on a load of weight, and he was like, weight moves weight. You know, he was like, that was his mindset. Now, I don't recommend you just get really, you know, just start packing on the pounds and to justify your 1 rep max. But if you're a day-to-day trainer, or your power lifter, like go up a weight class. You know, if you're basically like, if you're just competing because you enjoy it, you like the little bit of competition, and you've kind of come to terms with, oh gee, I don't think it's going to work out for me on the international level. I could probably benefit just from actually my lifting by increase my weight 2 or 3 kilos.
Yeah.
And that could bring up my lifts across the board. Like, I would say that's a lot better for development than adding 1 or 2 kilos to your lift by staying at the same body weight.
Yeah. I mean, like, you're 100% right, because can you add a little bit of weight onto your lifts, keeping your body weight the exact same? Yeah, sure you can. You're probably going to have to start training at very high intensities, really maximize your ability to recruit those muscles and fire them at maximal weights. But the amount of time and energy you have to put in for very little return, if your goal is to try to get your 1 rep max up as high as you can, and you don't have an issue with putting on weight, it's just a much more efficient route to go. Because going back to what I was saying about that normalized muscle force idea, you're creating more room for you to grow stronger by making that muscle bigger. And there's research that's been done on this. I put it in an Instagram post last week, I think, that found that something like only, I can't remember the exact number. I think only 5 or 6% of the difference in strength amongst beginners could be explained by the muscle mass they had. But once they got into the intermediate stage, I think it was around 70% of the difference in strength in intermediates could be explained by how much muscle they had on their frame. So in other words, the intermediates who had more muscle mass were more than likely the ones who were stronger.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's you see that every day you walk into a gym. At some
yeah.
point, we'll get to do it again.
Yeah.
But the analogy of that I can kind of think of is, you know, you have those little studio trampolines, and they can handle one person who weighs, you know, 100, 120 kilos, and they can bounce up all day and all night. But if you take a bigger trampoline, if you have 5 or 6 people, you've increased that surface area. It can take more people. It can take that more force.
Yeah.
And muscles are very similar. We increase the cross-sectional area of a muscle. In research, if you're ever reading research, they love using the quad. They just love using the quad
That's
and
because
love
they can
using.
have people do horrendously painful leg extensions to failure.
Yeah, just absolutely bury them, and they're usually like elderly people as well in their 60s, and it's it's like an intervention for 8 weeks, and it's like, yeah, they've increased their size by 7.5%, and then everyone's like, right, I'm gonna run this 8 week leg extension program. Nah, it's that's just research. So I'd say, like, for most people, like you're saying there, to realistically continue development, still enjoy training and hit PBs and everything. That being that, you know, you're kind of relatively young and you're not on that other side of, I don't know what it is now, 45, 50, as medicine gets better and everything like that.
Mm,
Can we still be gaining strength? I don't know. But I'd say the the reason basically for just continuing to train with a little bit of added weight is because, from a psychological point of view, it's just it's much easier for me anyway, and it's much easier for anyone that I train, just to slap on 2 or 3 kilos
mm,
of muscle, mixed muscle, mixed fat, and then continue on with your lifts, and it's at no cost to their greater health.
yeah.
um but the going in and lifting 160 kilos on your deadlift for the entire year, not seeing any improvement, and then, you know, just realizing, oh, I've stayed at such a body weight for so long.
Yeah.
Can I just bump it up and see what happens? And I'd say go for it. You know, no harm.
Yeah. And actually, this segues really nicely into the last main topic that I wanted to cover with you, which is bulking and cutting, probably more so focused on bulking for this podcast. Because I'd say that, ironically, um, as somebody who primarily works with guys who are trying to put on strength and muscle, one of the hardest sells that I have to try to make to people is the idea that they maybe need to put on some weight. And I think probably the main negative influence on people's outlook on this has been social media, because again, we are generally, when we're looking through our social media timelines, depending on who we're following, we're probably for the most part looking at genetic outliers who are going to be posting about themselves getting stronger. And when you look at their photos, it looks like they're like 10% body fat and they still have abs. And that becomes your expectation of what you should be able to do. Um, so I notice a massive aversion, particularly with young guys who maybe haven't been, experiencing years of a plateau yet, to putting on that little bit of body fat, and which should come with a significant amount of muscle, but just that idea of losing their abs like sends them into a panic. And then you see people just, wasting a year of training by doing a bulk, panicking before they've actually managed to gain any appreciable amount of strength or muscle, and then they go straight into a really aggressive cut, and then the net balance by the time they get to the end of the year is really zero. They're just kind of back to where they started. So what is your take on that?
So I agree with you wholeheartedly on the social media thing, because I guess I started training for bodybuilding I guess seriously in like an older school type bodybuilding gym, who kind of promoted like you gain a little bit of weight in your off season. You know, you've if if you're into bodybuilding, you use your off season time not as time to look good or, you know, have six pack abs. You use it to put on size, and I guess that kicks me out of um the realm of like having six pack abs and stuff like that very early on. But you still get it from, you know, lads asking you, both men and women, how to get like toned abs or how to have these things year round.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult sell when, like you're saying, their favorite influencer, the people that are seen on their feed, have these physiques seemingly year round, even though I could have a great physique year round if I was to scroll through my camera roll and just pick the best pictures and
Yeah.
not display what I look like today versus what I looked like in 2018 on prep.
Yeah.
Um, but it's it is a difficult sell to say, oh, just put on a bit of weight. But again, one of the things they say is most of these influencers, you know, that you're looking at, or people who have great physiques now, are slowly losing mass. I won't name any names, but we can see it in some of the lads. They're slowly losing mass because they're so keen on staying lean year round. You've
Mm.
seen them literally go from being competitors on the stage to now being, you know, a quarter smaller, like have lost 10 kilos in the last, you know, 2 years. But they're still quote unquote lean, they still have abs.
Yeah.
um but if they were to stand beside their previous self, you'd be like, oh my god, it's a night and day difference.
Yeah.
So if you want to continue to put on mass, put on size, getting bigger, yeah, you just have to get comfortable at being in that uncomfortable stage. You know, I'm 113, 114 kilos now at 5'9". It's not a comfortable place to be. For by any means, I'm out of breath when I walk up the stairs. Not
Yeah.
really, but it's just where I needed to go for my goals. And if I was to say for, you know, your everyday layman or woman, I'd be like, pop on another, you know, over the course of a year, if you were to put 5 or 10 kilos on, and then go into a cut after that year. These are just arbitrary numbers. They're just
Yeah.
easy to
Yeah.
manage. Um, you know, if you were to lose, then cut down, you've probably gained a little bit of muscle, and then we look better at, you know, 60 kilos, 70 kilos. We have more shape. Hold that for the summertime because apparently the summertime is the only time that we want to ever look good.
Yeah.
And then after that, you know, enjoy the winter. And that's a very kind of like, again, arbitrary way of looking at it. But when should we bulk and cut? I think it's going to be heavily dependent on where the person is starting at. For sure, you know, everyone's going to be different, and even their training is going to depend on that. How their weekly nutrition is. You know, if someone is in a bad way in terms of eating and eating behavior, it might not make sense for them to even go into a bulk or cut because you don't even know where they're starting.
Yeah.
Um, it's just get that in check first, and then we can play around with it from there on.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think so. To anybody listening to this, like generally speaking, for a male, anything above 20% body fat is generally where you start getting into where there could be potential negative impacts on your health. So I think usually the expert advice would tend to be not to start a bulk if you're somebody who's already at 20% body fat, because that's going to then push you up to maybe 25% or above, and then by the time you go to a cut, you're still going to be in somewhat of an unhealthy range. But at the same time, you would probably have been exposed to more ideas like this than me, but I had seen people before dispensing this idea that you have to be, 10% or below body fat to be deserving of starting a bulk, because that's going to somehow optimize the amount of lean muscle you can put on. And again, to go back to the Stronger by Science guys, which is a great website and resource, they recently did some analysis of different studies that had looked at muscle gain in people at different body fat percentages. And they found no correlation between the body fat that somebody was at and the amount of muscle mass they were able to find. And actually, in some of the analyses they did, there seemed to be a greater propensity for people at higher body fat percentages to put on muscle. Now, whether that's true or not, there'd have to be more research done. But it seems like at best, there doesn't seem to be any influence at all. So I think somebody at 15% body fat thinking that, you know, they need to get down to like 9 or 8% body fat just to be able to start getting a bit of muscle is probably making the wrong decision there. Would you agree?
I'd say if you're like at 15%, which is, you know, your everyday person kind of lean, you know, you look good in clothes, whatever, and you probably have some shape of abs when you take your top off. You could go either way, but if you were to come to me and be like, oh, I'm 15% body fat, and I'd like to gain a bit of muscle, a bit of strength, I it's an easy decision to go into a
Mm,
surplus and start training to gain muscle, because worst case or best case scenario, you continue to gain muscle with little amounts of fat and you go up to 16-17% but have a dramatic change in body composition.
yeah.
Worst case scenario is you go up to 20-22% body fat. You know, your composition doesn't change, but underneath that body fat is muscle, and
Yeah.
it's not as a pretty transformation as people want to see, because they see these 8 weeks transformations where someone that goes from having these big love handles and you know, the kind of man boobs going on as well. I speak to my man boob brethren out there. But they go from having that kind of body then to like having the shape of abs, and their, you know, their flat size, all in 8 weeks, and
Yeah.
it looks like they've gained muscle, when in reality that's not the case. They've just decreased the amount of fat that there's on their body, and it looks like there's more shape to it, but
Mm,
it was always there.
yeah.
And that's again, that's a hard sell, because it's not what's being shown on social media at the moment.
Yeah. I've always felt like people need to, like, before they make any decision about whether they're going to bulk or cut, they need to make a decision about what their goal is. So, you know, do they care more about gaining strength or looking better or gaining muscle? Um, and what are they, you know, what kind of body weights would be sustainable for them and would they be happy with? So I've never seen any point in somebody who isn't going to be a bodybuilding competitor cutting down to like sub 10% body fat if they're only going to be able to stay there for a few weeks, and then they're eventually just going to end up going back up to 15% anyway because they can't sustain never having any
Doesn't make sense.
desserts and not being able to socialize with people properly. It's so much pain and discomfort and hassle to put yourself through for somewhere you're just going to live for maybe a month or two at most.
Yeah, it's again, like it's great to get down there, but I think there's a lot of negatives that come with getting down there,
Yeah.
than there is positives if you're not going to compete. Like, one of the things is, like, amongst physique competitors, you know, body dysmorphia, body image issues, they're massive, because
Yeah.
the association with yourself at 5 or 7% body fat as being the best version of yourself
Mm,
is very dangerous, because it's not a
mm,
healthy place to be. So
yeah.
when you're at 10 or 12% body fat, you're like, you know, grabbing your skin. You're like, when you're perfectly healthy, this is your
Mm,
optimal self.
yeah.
So I think for the general person, you know, I think cutting down for festivals is silly. I think cutting down, you know, I
Just even the
literally,
notion of that to me is just crazy.
I know, but it happens. You know,
Yeah.
people going on, you know, 8 to 12 week diets for a festival, and I heard young lads talking about it once, and they were doing a water cut, and they were cycling their water up until a week. And I was like, that's just dangerous, you know. Like, that was time for. I didn't step in, but I was like, I felt like turning in and be like, you're just gonna mess yourselves up for the weekend. You're not gonna enjoy it. Like,
Yeah,
um,
if there's one time you want to be well hydrated for, it's a 3 day
it's
long
a
session.
it's a festival for by
Yeah.
any means. Um, but I think for the general person, the leanest I would imagine for men anyway is probably around, you know, 10 to 12% looks
Mm,
pretty good. I
Yeah.
think if you saw like a guy with a decent amount of muscle at 10 or 12% body fat, you would look at him and be like, damn, like that's a good shape. And
Yeah.
like you'd obviously be like, he's a bit athletic and everything. For women, it's like 20%,
Mm.
around that 20% mark,
Yeah.
which again is not often told in social media, that women naturally have higher percentage of body fat.
Yeah.
And again, there's this kind of whole like, oh, you need to be 15% body fat, which makes, your average woman walking around probably between 25-30% body fat. It makes them seem like they're way off the mark, which is
Yeah.
untrue completely. It's like, the sweet spot is probably around that 25% for women, and it's probably around 15% for men.
Mm.
As far as like you're probably training nicely, you probably look good in most settings.
Yeah.
um because there's negatives to when you're too low. Your training gets affected, your just general mood is affected. If you're pushing it too far, your hormones begin to get affected. And
Especially
it's
for women.
it's especially for women. There's the female athlete triad, which is
Yeah.
massive. And it's something that again it's slowly gaining more and more attention. But
Yeah.
men can still suffer. Don't think men are indestructible from this either. Like the
Mm.
men will experience massive drop off in testosterone if they keep on going lower, if they keep on chasing lower percentage body fat by decreasing their calories continuously over longer periods of time.
Yeah. And I think people really need to address the relationship that they have with how their body looks. And if you feel like the guys on, I don't know if you listen to the Iron Culture podcast. It's Eric Helms and Omar Isuf, but it's a
Yeah,
very good podcast that has a good mixture of science and kind of just bantering back and forth. But did you listen to the episode they did a while ago about when to bulk and when to cut?
I know I'm terrible for my podcasts at the moment. I know of it though.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was only listening to this yesterday actually, and but he's your man Eric Helms surmised it very well that, like, the decision of whether you're going to bulk or cut um should basically just be, are you in a healthy body fat percentage range? Um, do you need to gain some strength and muscle? If the answer to that is yes, then bulk. And if the answer to those first two questions is no, then you cut. But then the other thing you need to add into that as well is, um, how are you going to feel about your body at the end of that? So maybe somewhat uniquely, I actually found last time I did a cut, and I don't know what body fat percentage I was at, because I didn't measure it, but I would have to guess that it was closer to below 15% than over 15%. I was actually unhappy with it, and not because I didn't look better. I think I definitely looked better, but my lifts went to shit. And I care much more about my strength than the way that I look. For me,
Mm.
gaining muscle is obviously a really nice accompaniment to that. But if I could put 20 kilos on my bench press and not gain a single centimeter of pec or arm size, I would be still extremely happy, because that's the main thing that I'm training for. So for me, um, I would rather look little bit fluffier as long as I'm still healthy and actually be lifting more weight and hitting PRs. But that's me personally. People need to make up their own decision about what it is that they care about most. Would they be unhappy hitting all-time PRs, but feeling like they have a little bit of a belly and not being able to see their abs? And that psychologically might not be healthy for them either.
Yeah, it's again, it's another area that's like it's so talked about, but it's so misunderstood. Of like, oh, once you get to a certain percentage of body fat, or once you get to your goal, so say like for you it was cutting, for me it'd be bulking, because I push myself to that upper limit of body fat, and I kind of get myself into a quote unquote uncomfortable range. Um, but for me, I only care what I look like one day every couple of years, or one day every year for
Yeah.
competition. That's the only year I care about how I look. Um, for other people, that's not going to be the case. They'd rather probably have look and feel good year round. And that has to be considered. So pushing yourself, hearing me talk and being like, oh, I'm 5'9", I'll push myself to 115 kilos as well. It's probably not going to work out as well for you in the long run, psychologically, if you don't have any plans to compete or bring yourself back down in weight.
Yeah.
And like you were saying there, when you cut down, you were like, oh, I just didn't enjoy it because your lifts went to shit. When I cut down, I don't enjoy it as much because I feel small.
Yeah.
And that's a massive psychological thing to me, because I spend a lot of my time walking around as quote unquote big, so that when I cut down and when I'm 75, 80 kilos, I feel like I'm nothing, that I've withered away, even though I
Yeah.
have a lot of muscle at that weight and at that frame, for my height and everything. It still affects me psychologically, and it's something that is not often addressed. Some people will favor being at a little bit higher weight year round because it gives them that little bit more confidence, and likewise some people will favor being a little bit lower because it gives them more confidence. And that's something you have to figure on yourself. I can't
Yeah.
tell you, Killian can't tell you. And you won't know it until you've gotten there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you have to, at a certain point, you kind of have to accept that you're going to make mistakes, and that's what's going to make you learn. So we could sit here and tell you all day that, trying to get to below 10% body fat probably isn't going to be unsustainable or enjoyable for you, but
Try it out.
yeah, try it out. Maybe you'd be the kind of person who'd love that, and you too could become a fitness influencer who stays jacked year round.
Yeah, you could become that guy. It's on the beaches of Abu Dhabi or Dubai or wherever they are all now, and drinking your margaritas and your six-pack abs. I'll follow you.
And you're bulking at the moment, so when for you is the point where you think you're going to decide that I'm happy with the progress I've made and now it's time to start cutting back down?
That's a really important question. It's a really good question. Um, for me, in terms of bodybuilding, it's not until I've seen the improvements that I want to see.
Mm,
And that sounds like a cop out kind of answer, but it's not, because I take progress pictures so frequently. I have my system for taking them. One of the things, though, obviously, this comes with what I know and just, you know, the years of experience of training and being a trainer myself, is that once my kind of physiological markers go to shit, I'll cut back. When my resting HR goes too high and it's consistently too high, when I'm just generally too uncomfortable in my
yeah.
in my body from day to day, and being at a certain weight is causing more issues than benefits at that time, I'll cut back. I'll do I hate the term mini cut. I just call it tidy up.
Yeah.
Just tidy up. Just bring weight back down so I can continue pressing on. But I won't then fully assess myself until I have a goal in mind. So say my one at the moment is to compete in 2022, late 2022. So every week I'm basically assessing and adjusting how uh, I'm going to prep for that show in 2022. I don't want to prep like I did last time, which was something like 36 weeks of dieting.
Yeah.
I'd much rather do a lot less. So I'm always monitoring my weight, my body fat percentage, and just making sure that, okay, I can have one, like say this year, I can have one cut this year of like about 10 to 12 weeks, and then get back up. But I had to have adequate amount of time basically to give my body a replenishment and get myself back up into a comfortable stage where I'd be ready then to go for an all-out competition prep, which would be like 20 maybe odd weeks,
Mm,
um, considering this time around. So I'm hoping that would be the case, but that's from constant assessment and myself. If that doesn't feel comfortable to you, find yourself a coach that is more than comfortable doing that for you, like looking at your pictures, looking at how you um are kind of every week, and being like, okay, yeah, we could probably do another month in a surplus And then after that, we can diet down with plenty of time, and you'll look great then. Or just for yourself, go by, different feelings. I wouldn't just use the mirror and scales. I would say use what you have. If you have a fitness tracker, use a fitness tracker just for your biological markers, but you have to go on how you're feeling as well. If you're feeling shit at a higher weight or a lower weight, it might be time to change up.
Yeah. Cool. And I think that's probably a good place to leave that. I think we've covered a good bit there, and I've managed to keep us probably at least a full hour shorter than we did last time.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for coming on to discuss all that. If people want to follow you on social media, remind me of your profile name again.
So it's Conor Galgey. So it's Galgey. You'll never find anyone else called that name.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard it before.
There's one other Conor Galgey. He lives in Australia. He's a sound dude. But there's only two of us.
It's probably a long lost relative of yours.
Oh yeah, if you ever come across another Galgey, I'm related to them in some way.
It's pretty easy to trace family line. Cool. And yeah, make sure to give Conor a follow on there. He's hitting some pretty cool numbers at the moment. You did 200 for reps on the deadlift recently, didn't you?
I did 200 for 5 on the deadlift for 2 weeks in a row. So that was grand.
Nice.
The second week was 200 for 5 and then a set of 3. And then I did 200 for a set of 5 on squats. My squat and my deadlift are always just kind of going back and forth on who can be the strongest.
Interesting.
It's quite annoying because I'm shit at deadlifting. So my squat is really good and my deadlift is terrible. So they're always like just there together.
Yeah.
And then my bench is I kind of do 130 for a couple of sets.
That's great.
Of 5 or 6. So that's not bad. I'm kind of chasing down. Like I have numbers in my head that I want to chase down. Like I want to get up to like a 240 deadlift, a 220 squat, and a 160 bench. But
Yeah.
like they're big numbers, and I'm a small dude at the moment, so it's constantly chasing after those. That keeps me going at the moment, anyway.
Yeah. Well, whatever you're doing is working, so keep it up, and I'm sure you'll hit that within the year.
Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks very much for coming on, man, and I'm sure we'll do it again soon.
Thanks for having me on.
Cheers.